Okay guys, we're back again. We're on day 3, McCann Day and Breeders' Cup Day, Ian. Really exciting.
Super.
So today, very, poignant that we have this talk today, which is marginal gains.
Marginal gains. I suppose we've entitled it Marginal Gains, the winning and losing of a competition. And I suppose we're going to look at maybe a few little areas where we kind of think, look, there may be some little percentages to be gained. And I suppose what I did when we came up with this conversation was just to look at what is marginal gains, like what do people mean by that? And you get these loads of lovely statements on LinkedIn and all these lovely inspiring people. And basically what it is requires looking at every aspect of performance and trying to improve each a little bit, just a fraction, a percentage, and all those percentages add up and could make the difference in the long run. And I suppose you've already said it there, Kirsty, it's Breeders' Cup Day. Probably marginal gains can even start from fertility and from, we'll say,
conception.
From the ground up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you're looking at breeding animals, breeding horses in particular, you're looking at having the smoothest run through, conception, pregnancy, through their gestation, into the birth, and then through lactation, then through weaning. So everything kind of hits one after the other, and if you miss one of those beats, you could be running into trouble on the next step.
Absolutely, and I mean, like as you say, there's the critical stages to hit, isn't it? Really, like
yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of there's no fixed goal line or goalpost, but it's making sure everything gets hit. And do we at Arc Equine, or do you guys at Arc Equine, is there stuff that we can provide that are going to help and benefit in terms of, we'll say, those? Do we have some supplements and stuff?
Yeah, well, I suppose first of all, what we have is our nutritional service, where we are going out and we're going onto farms and into stud farms, and we're looking at the entire management of those mares nutritionally, management of the stallions as well, because stallions are super important to keep them right during their performance for that period of the year.
It's very important because most people actually forget the male factor, and everyone always thinks it's just the female factor.
Yeah.
I'm saying this as a man in front of you, so I am, but like it's the male factor.
Yeah, we got to look after our men, we got to look after our women, and make sure everything's good. And like what we will do is we will look at your forage intake, your grass intake, your land type, and we will then look at the diet, and we'll make sure that we're hitting all of those key ratios which we spoke about on day 1 with regards to calcium, phosphorus, zinc and copper, and make sure that we have enough of everything going in the correct ratio to make sure that we've got good bone lay down, good fetal development. So everything from fertility we look at. We look at making sure that we're keeping your mares in good condition. We try and do we'll do 2 things, I suppose, Ian, which is really important to talk about. We'll look at your herd as a whole as well, but then we'll pick out your problem mares.
Yes.
And we'll say, okay, well, that mare maybe puts on a little bit too much condition during her pregnancy, so we may look at a calorie controlled diet for her, so making sure that the fetus is getting what it needs to develop, but also that the mare is being looked after, so that she's being kept in good condition, not overweight, because then you can run into problems foaling if they're overweight, and then you can run into problems getting them back in full. So what everybody wants as a breeder is a short turnaround time, so they want their mares to foal, healthy, good quality colostrum, etc., and then go back to the stallion as quickly as possible. So
I suppose it's important in what you're saying there is that we're not just going to turn around and give a broad brushstroke of things and say this is what we're doing for everything. It's more tailored to the individual.
Yes, and then looking at the feed, looking at the forage, looking at then where do we fix problems, where do we put in more copper, calcium, phosphorus, zinc, etc., like that, and making sure then if we do have, for example, stallions who have maybe a little bit of problem, or they're getting a bit older and we want to support their fertility, we can look at ways to support them nutritionally. Stallions, one of the biggest things, I walk into yards and I look at stallions and the first thing I say is, how's their joints? And they look at me going, we're not going to look at underneath. And I'm like, the act of covering is quite, there's a huge amount of wear and tear. So any level of pain is going to affect their fertility.
Labor intensive, as you might say.
It is. So we look at everything. So you're right. It does start from the very, very beginning.
Yeah, and I suppose then if we turn our attention a little bit more to performance, there's a few areas recently where we've come and we've got a little bit more technology, I suppose, to kind of assist in terms of what we're looking at and maybe helping in terms of, we'll say, eking out those marginal gains. And one of those things that, we'll say, you've recently brought to the market is the tail tap system.
Yeah, this is a brilliant system. So the tail tap system is a complete non-invasive temperature monitoring device. So we're here, all right, there's 1,600 horses here this week. I think we've 220 international stables. So those horses have travelled internationally into Ireland. So they've been travelling for a period of time. And when they're travelling, you can't necessarily keep an eye on something as vital as temperature. That is your first indicator of something going wrong. So what this system does is it monitors temperature every 5 minutes, links to your smartphone, and then gives you a complete graph, a complete trend of that horse's temperature over a period of time. So, you know, we're introducing to a lot of the international riders here this week. It's going really, really well. You know, it's being used currently primarily in veterinary practices to monitor, you know, from a health point of view. But for travelling, flying, if your horses are flying, you can't get into the jet stall, so you can't get their temperature. So this is a way of doing it without actually having to go near the horse. Really, really accurate, really, really good piece of kit. And talking about like performance horses, people always talk about preparation.
Yes, absolutely.
And then when the horse has actually done what they need to do, they tend to not look at recovery. Okay, so recovery leads into preparation for the next event. So your recovery, and what we do at Arc Equine is we kind of, you know, people have preparation kind of down. They know how fit they have to get their horse. They know what they need to do. They know how they want them to look. But what we look at is after the event. We look at how to make sure that you've got the shortest downtime to the next one, and we're doing that with our racehorse trainers at the moment. You know, the short, you know, calendar for sprinters, especially on the flat. Those horses need to come out and be able to run again quite quickly. So, you know, what we're able to do is go, right, when that horse finishes, we'll look at what we could do for those couple of days afterwards to support their protein levels, amino acids, get their muscles back functioning. Muscles are a big thing for performance.
And I tighten up that recovery period.
100%.
Absolutely. And I suppose when you just to flip back and not jumping back and forth, but like in terms of the tail tap system, I know that the guys that you're working with on this have used this in terms of some racehorses that have travelled to Hong Kong.
Yes.
And they had shown that, this is where it really comes in, and it's a really useful piece of kit, in that horses that were showing spikes of temperature weren't performing to the same level.
So there's a study done that horses that show spikes in temperature 5 days preceding a race didn't win.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so it was just like, should we run them or not?
Yeah.
If you go, we're going to run them, you're basically taking one of the chips. It's done. Do you know what I mean? So so really, really interesting study that came out of the Hong Kong Jockey Club.
Yeah, and so I mean, in terms of like what we're talking about today, in terms of the marginal gains, this then really has a big impact on that. And as you're saying, because it's a non-invasive method of taking the temperature, we can constantly monitor them for those week leading up to a big race.
So it works. It's on a tab, so a sticky tab sits underneath their tail. It'll last 5 to 7 days. It's 100% waterproof. I tested that. They told me it was, and I tested by swimming horses in them, and they are 100% waterproof. So yeah, and you can put a tail bandage on over them for traveling, things like that. No problem at all.
Wow. Seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know we have some testimonials from some guys who've used it as well now.
Yeah, Des Layden flies horses all over the world, you know, thoroughbreds, and he's using it in all his transporting.
Super.
Yeah.
You alluded to earlier on the importance of some of the forage systems that we'll say, and obviously in that comes into, I suppose, effect because we make so much hay in this country, and the importance of that and the importance of the quality of it and how that can link to, we'll say, potential problems with respiratory health, as you spoke with John yesterday.
Yeah.
Potential digestive health, as we spoke about on Wednesday. But we'll say you've also got, I suppose, just general bad hay, poor performances and stuff like that. Like, so I mean, here at Arc Equine, we've now just recently acquired and we're recently putting out there a steaming system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose again, when you're talking about performance, you're traveling, you know, to these multi-day shows, or that you're using different forage sources. So it may not be the same forage you're using at home. You know, it could have sat for a while in less than ideal conditions, etc. So having a hay steamer really means that you can mitigate against problems. So, you know, our system is really easy to travel around with, and it's lightweight, so
absolutely.
No issue at all with that. But yeah, respiratory health, we spoke yesterday about respiration, respiratory health and everything. And, you know, we spoke about food, and everybody kind of refers to feeds being the fuels to do what you need to do. But realistically, when that horse is galloping or that horse is performing, oxygen is fuel.
Oh yeah.
That's what it is. Oxygen is what's key. If there's cutting the oxygen, it's like cutting the fuel tank off. So, you know, if you've got a respiratory system that is kind of working subpar, then you're not going to have that oxygenation you need to your muscles to be able to perform. So yeah, oxygen, really, really important. So looking after that respiratory system, and hay being something that can potentially bring in a problem.
Yeah, no, very definitely. So looking after all of those things is part and parcel of what we're doing here to, I suppose, give you those little percentages.
Yes,
percentage gains.
absolutely.
The final thing we thought we'd talk about maybe this morning was just a little introduction to the water and water system that we now are currently just bringing to the market.
Yeah.
We're going to go more into depth of that this afternoon, so we are. And it's just, I suppose, water is a huge thing that goes into every horse.
Well, the volume of water that goes into horses, you know, is massive.
It seems silly that we talk about water in this country.
I
It
know,
rains
yeah.
for what, 340 days a year,
Yeah.
probably. You know,
yeah.
so.
Yeah. So, but the volume that goes into your horse, and if you're relying on water for hydration, for performance, you want to have good quality water going in. And also, if you have water that isn't great, they're not really going to want to drink it as much.
Absolutely.
So looking and making sure that you've got that good water quality is really, really important. And water is vital for all body systems.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I know we're going to talk about it in more depth later on. But as far as water goes in performance, we need to have a chat about electrolytes.
Absolutely.
And talk about how important electrolytes are. So horses, you know, they sweat a lot. You know, the huge volumes of sweat when they're in, temperatures are high and they're working hard and things like that. And replacing the salts lost through sweat is really, really important. So making sure you have a good electrolyte plan in place. Do horses need electrolytes every single day? Absolutely not. They don't. Your feeds will have a certain amount of electrolytes in them, certain amount of salts. But that is only good for kind of maintenance level. The horse is not doing much. If the temperatures are very warm and you want to increase their water intake to stay hydrated, it's important to use electrolytes. And then whenever they sweat, it's important to use electrolytes as well. Giving electrolytes, a lot of people will say to me, should I give electrolytes before they travel? You know, should I preload them with electrolytes? No need, absolutely not. And the problem you run into is, and I've seen it so many times, people give electrolytes before they travel, and then the horses are traveling with no access to water.
Yes.
So their brain is saying, I need to drink, but they've got nothing to drink. So then
in effect, they're probably dehydrated.
They are dehydrating, exactly. So if you're giving electrolytes, it is key to have clean, fresh water always available.
And that links in nicely to what we're going to talk about later on, the purpose of and how we can help you get that clean, fresh water quality.
Yeah.
So hopefully, join us later on this afternoon, where myself and Kirsty will hope bring the new Aquatabs inline system.
Yeah.